Welcome, everyone, to In the Hot Seat. For our repeat viewers, thank you for joining again. For those of you who are new to the show, every 2 weeks we put industry experts and or customers in the hot seat for a lively discussion, some debate, even a little discourse as we humanize the digital experience. All aspects of the customer life cycle are up for discussion, as well as the technologies used throughout each phase of the journey. This episode's a part of our AI Impact series, and it's focused on applications and browser security and privacy. So, Thomas, I was looking this morning through a survey that Pew Research Center did this year, actually in May, and it was interesting because mostly focused on privacy, and I know we're going to talk a bit about browsers, but I was surprised a little bit about how much concern there is in the U.S. these days, and I give you a couple of stats from it. 81% of the people, so it was a big survey, like 5,100 people. 81% said they're concerned about how companies use their data that's collected. 67% admitted to having little understanding of what companies do with their data, and in fact, that's probably because 6 in 10 said they don't read privacy policies.
Yep.
And I mean, I'm in the 6. So, and 73% feel they have little to no control over data collected by companies. 79% felt that way about government. So even worse with government. And among those who heard of AI, companies use AI to collect and analyze personal information. This information will be used in ways that I would not be comfortable with, 81%. And in ways not originally intended, 80%. So what do you think about that? Is that a surprise to you?
No.
I shouldn't ask. I shouldn't ask close-ended questions.
I'm a German. I'm a German, so cynic by default. But in general, I mean, we know since forever, basically, that businesses as well as organizations and governmental institutions are collecting data. Mr. Snowden, anybody? So we know it for quite some while. Yeah? We have and still do give quite some credit in terms of trust. And I guess that triggered by the current debate on generative AI, that a kind of a tipping point in terms of suspicions got triggered. That basically says, hey, are they really using their data or my data to my benefit or purely to theirs?
Yeah. I mean, I think that's valid. And I have always said online, the concept always had been value for value, right? So you take my data, I get to use free email. Is that equivalent? I mean, I guess I thought so because I use Gmail. But I mean, I wonder, when does that get out of balance,
Yeah, the balance is when I feel cheated. Or, well, it's getting out of balance when I feel cheated. Yeah, and it's purely, well, in your, in everybody's head. So there's no fixed boundary. And with all the data breaches that become more and more known, it becomes more and more known how much is actually getting collected. And well, without reading privacy policies, I'm one of the 6.7 as well, by the way.
I'm not surprised.
That is, well, it's not surprising that businesses are using and partly abusing it.
Yeah.
And well, why can I, coming to the topic of browsers, why can I give a free browser? Well, because you give me free data.
Yeah, well, I mean, that's right. That is the trade-off. And I also think people are a little numb from all of the years of kind of moving the line of what privacy is. I used to joke about Facebook, Meta, they'd take 2 steps forward, everybody'd get really upset, and they'd take 1 step back. And that went on for years and years. And so over time, of course, it's the concept eroded. Now, maybe you're right, though. Maybe the Gen AI kind of brought this up again around data use and made people more aware. Yeah.
Let's hope.
Yeah,
But
I hope.
well, see these black-clad analyst type-ish amateurs. So let's bring in a pro, right? So Q, let's bring in Tejas. Tejas Gadhia, he is the head evangelist of Zoho's development platform, which is a unified development platform that is comprised of lots of tools, pro and low code. He is also evangelist and product manager for ULA. What is ULA? ULA is a web browser which is privacy focused. And having done a lot of conversations on privacy with other channels like Brent's security channel,
Yep.
he is one of the guys who is possibly well asked and well informed about browsers and privacy. Hey, welcome, Tejas.
Thanks. I left my black shirt at home today. I was going to wear it actually.
Well,
you know,
wait,
I thought we sent you the note.
Wait. Q.
No hats.
You are bringing the Q.
No hats. No hats.
I still have it from the other show. Props are just mandatory.
Nice. Well, Tejas, welcome, and I mean, I'm excited to talk about this, and I know, we talked a bit about the browser before, and it's interesting. But why don't we start back a step, though? Like, how do you see online privacy in your definition? How do you think about online privacy?
I think you said it best earlier, Michael, where you're talking about kind of the exchange of data. I give you something and I get something in return. I think most people were pretty comfortable with that type of relationship. I think where it went a little south is in your example of like, I use Google email, and so I expect them to read my emails, and in exchange for getting free email, I might get some targeted ads, or I'm giving up the privacy of my inbox in exchange for the free email service. Well, I mean, I think people are okay with that sign-up trade-off for the most part. Where it gets weird and where privacy kind of went astray is probably the last 10 years or so, the rise of kind of supplementary data to feed whatever vendor you're using. So a couple examples of this, I mean, Google and Facebook, I guess, are probably the two biggest companies that do this. But basically, every page you used to go to that had a Facebook like button on there, that wasn't just like an image you clicked on that liked the page back then. It was actually a script that ran. So then every page you visited on any browser that had that and you were logged into your Facebook account with, or maybe you weren't even logged in, they were able to identify it based on your computer, your screen resolution, your processor, your browser version, your location, all these different variables out there. They can actually pinpoint it's you. And so some people think, oh, I'm signed out of Facebook, they can't track me anymore. That's actually not how it works. And so I think all of this, what we call adjunct surveillance, or basically surveillance that happens without you knowing about it, that's where the privacy concerns started creeping up a lot more. So in the beginning, it was a simple exchange of, I post things on Facebook and they can read the posts that I make and see the pages that I like. And based on that, they see that I like, I don't know, a page about cars. And so I'm going to get some advertisements about cars. That seems like a pretty basic, fair trade. But then when they go and dig through my bank account statements, my credit card transactions, my location data, my browsing history, and use that to identify I like about cars, that's where it gets a little, I guess, scary for the most part. So to answer your actual question on like what privacy really means to me is being able to protect yourself as much as you can online, and really through these kind of like backdoor methods that you can hopefully protect yourself from. And if you can't protect yourself from the backdoor methods, the least you could do is try to avoid giving up your data as willingly as possible, unless the exchange is pretty good.
But what levers do I have at all? I mean, I don't have any control about the browser as such, for example, or the applications, apart from how I operate them. So which sites I visit, which features and functions of the app I'm using, but else I'm at the mercy of the builder, right?
Yeah, I mean, it's pretty hard. I kind of put this in two different buckets. One is, let's say, the online world, which is what most of us are familiar with, and then the offline world. So in the offline world, I think there was a big story a little while ago. Walmart doesn't support Apple Pay on any of their transactions. And the reason for that is Apple Pay actually doesn't, it like masks, it creates like a temporary credit card number so they can't identify who's spending it. But every other vendor, when you swipe your credit card, that credit card number and that transaction, that data is then sold and shared and rented out the legalese of the actual word. Some people will say we never sell your data, but we might share it with our business partners or might use it for marketing interests. It's very kind of hard to wade through that kind of mess of legalese. But the reason or Walmart doesn't let that happen is because they want the transaction data for every user who's checking out, and so they won't allow Apple Pay. In Texas, we have a big grocery retailer called HEB, and they do the exact same thing. No tap to pay. It has to be a physical card that gets slid in there. And so that's just one way of like your offline world. You wouldn't notice that inconvenience, but it's really how it kind of gets transferred over. Not to say on the flip side, there isn't services. I think the rise of like Square and Toast and all these like mobile POS systems, those actually do have a way because you can create an account or send a receipt to an email, and now your email address is associated to that card. And there's a lot of ways to kind of connect that offline stuff to your like online identity. And so we always think about ads being, you know, this like intrusive thing you see on a website. But something interesting I kind of saw, kind of went down the rabbit hole actually of, was advertisements in kind of TVs and movies. And so what's actually being tested is like, imagine you're like Netflix. And so I'll use Netflix as a good example because they're making a big push into like an ad-based model. And so those ads are, people think of ads as maybe like a 10, 15, 30 second, 1 minute clip that interrupts you from your show. But what if that's not ads? What if in every single show, there is a character drinking something, a cup, and that cup could either be Coke or it could be Pepsi, and that's the highest bidder, or it could be Sprite, or it could be Fanta, and it could be Dr. Pepper, it could be whatever you're drinking, it could be a beer. That is dynamically added to every single scene based on the user that's watching it. So then there's a lot of like back end things, especially around like media with TVs and movies, where product placement has become such a huge part of the actual show itself. Sometimes it's blatantly obvious, and sometimes it's a little bit more, I would say, like natural feeling. One show I used to think was a lot better. It's called Billions. It's like a finance show on Showtime, I think. They have like an incredible amount of like product placement for like high end stuff in New York. That's like premium, like a premium gym, like an Equinox, or like something nicer than that, or a fancy restaurant. These are all product placement things that are paid to play, and that's advertising. And what we see it as static, but it could actually be very dynamic. The name on the menu that appears in that scene could be very dynamic, and the ambiance can be also changed. And so I think when we get into like generative stuff and a lot of like the advances in like filling features with video editing, you'll see a lot more of this kind of advertising being so subtle that you don't even realize it's happening. So I think gone are the days of like this annoying block on a website that you kind of just ignore, like is like an eyesore. That's like, I would say, old advertising. The new advertising is going to be way more sophisticated. And way more intrusive, I think. It's just whether people realize it or not.
Well, I mean, it's even gone to the point now where you have retail-focused or e-commerce platforms that dynamically serve the product descriptions and even the background image. So it knows you, it knows you're in, you know, Texas, or it knows you're in Berlin. It's going to serve you a different backdrop to put it in the context to make you feel like it's really made for you, which means that data is shared even more. That's
that's the tricky part. I think, and also most people always kind of think of kind of the privacy trade-off leading to advertisements, or more like data collection leading to advertisements. There's other ways that data collection can be used for or against you. So, I mean, a good example is, I think over the last like 10 years or so, a lot of car insurance companies started offering like discounts if you install like a adapter in the OBD port or whatever, and it'll track your driving. It'll see how fast you accelerate, how fast you brake, how fast your turns are, where you're driving to, all of that data. And they basically, what they sell you on is they say, you know what, we won't raise rates on you. It can only go lower. So that basically means like, worst case, we're collecting data for free. Best case, we might throw you a few pennies or dollars to make it a little bit cheaper if you're what they consider to be a safe driver. And so that kind of like dynamic charging basically is a thing. I think, I wouldn't be surprised it could work out, because in some situations, it might actually help you save money with that data collection. It might prove you're a safer driver. I think like Tesla is working on some insurance that like ties into car sensors that basically will keep track of how you drive and then offer a little bit more dynamic pricing. It could work in your favor, but it also could not, because you don't actually know how that algorithm was like really configured. And at the end of the day, if the car insurance company knows that I make, 50K versus if they know that I make 100K, they can easily change the price, and you have no way to discern that. And so they basically buy your financial data from, like ADT or not ADT, ABP, or who's like the big payroll people, ADP, yeah. So they'll buy it from or rent it from ABP or Experian or whoever they is. They know your income, and once you know someone's income, you can dynamically price anything, and you'll just kind of tweak it by a couple dollars, a couple pennies, and see if somebody flinches. And there's no way to really shop that, and you can never get an apples to apples comparison because it's just like, oh, that's the price that we got. So that's the risky part.
I mean, we moved a long way from the the way that airline ticket prices changed. For example, when they used to base the pricing on whatever machine you're using. So if you're using a Mac, you got charged more than if you were using an Acer or whatever, right? So I mean, it sounds like it's getting a lot more sophisticated, though. So that's troubling, I guess. So one of the things that has changed a lot in business, I think, is this idea of bringing your own devices into the company. And there's been this argument, I think, that's gone on for a while. Like, how do you, if I'm using my device in your environment, how do you make sure things are safe? How do I make sure things are safe? Or how do I keep personal and business separate? Or maybe the question is, can I or do I keep business or personal separate?
Yeah, I think it's pretty risky. I mean, super convenient to bring your own device. And the one from the company perspective, you don't have to actually pay for the device, or it's more personal oriented. And the hope is if you have a single device that blurs work and personal life, you're more available. And from the company perspective, it all sounds great. But the security trade-off is pretty high, I would say, because I mean, you can lock down a phone with some like MDM software and keep track of location and stuff like that. But most of the time, the sites and things that people are doing on their personal time are like far less secure and out of IT's control. I've seen some people with like really crazy compliance policies and MDM profiles that are installed on phones. But I'd say in general, it's a little risky. It's almost better to have a separate device. But I can see why companies don't really do it. I don't really have a good answer one way or the other. But I think like when you blur those devices, that's kind of where like I would say like it's probably where phishing attacks probably are most easily used. I think like the MGM attack of like last month or 2 months ago, that was literally just a phishing attack. They like swapped the SIM card of like the CIO or something like that, called in the help desk, asked for a 2-factor authentication code, and then the security guy just gave it to him. And so like in situations like that, when you can phish somebody, then it could be like, all right, on the personal phone, you get a text or a message or a notification or something, and then it goes into like work apps and devices. I also just don't think like, I'm not super familiar on the Android side, but at least on the iPhone side, there isn't really like the best sandboxing of like a work profile mode. There's like focus modes and like random, kind of more gimmicky things, but not really like a pure isolated way to, keep business apps separate from personal apps. That becomes kind of hard.
Yeah, no, that makes sense. I mean, it's certainly, if you're thinking about privacy too, from a personal perspective, it seems to me like the more business data I have on my machine, there's also risk there that I'm just telling them even more about myself that is going to be used in some way that I don't actually understand. So,
yeah, I mean, that's a good point because like oftentimes, let's say most people use probably a single browser on their computer working around. Let's just say, assume they're using Chrome or something. And on that Chrome, they probably have their personal Gmail account logged in. Maybe they have an Outlook on like a desktop app or something, and they're logged into their Facebook and Twitter and Instagram or whatever else social sites. They're browsing around everywhere, but then they're also doing research for their job. They're looking up like company information or internet sites or external sites, reviewing competitors or anything like the market research, whatever. All that still gets tied to that personal profile, and it's not too hard to discern where somebody works and what their role is at that company. That information is extremely widely available. LegalZoom made like $1 billion. LegalZoom, not LegalZoom. There's a couple of these big like data companies that basically trade just business data, right? I mean, Dun & Bradstreet, for example, right? They know your person, they know where you work, all that kind of stuff. Everybody uses it. Everyone uses it for what they call like lead enrichment or kind of customer information gathering. That's all public information. So once you know who they are, where they work, what they do at that company, and then all the information of how they actually work in that role, that's like that's scary from a company perspective, right? You want to kind of silo that business data off from personal.
So
yeah, maybe I want that personally too.
yeah. So right, so the business should not always know what I'm researching
Yeah, if you're searching on
outside
LinkedIn for new jobs or
pure
whatever, it could
closed
be a little
business.
risky, right?
Yeah,
I think there was a story like that actually. There was somebody on Indeed, like at work, shopping for jobs, like obviously applying during work on their work computer. And
Yeah.
you know, obviously on the work network, you're going to know every website somebody's going to, and
Yeah.
that's pretty much a red flag right there, right? So
Interesting.
Very red flag. Yeah. So, but how from a business point of view, so turning things around. So, well, I'm probably quite stupid using my work machine, doing work time research for a new job. But on the other hand, organizations, businesses want to keep, well, a distinction between business profiles and personal profiles as well. So what can they do? Well, they are monitoring, maybe, or may not be. Then they at least know and can slap me on the fingers. What are there other ways, better ways?
yeah, I mean, I would say the vast majority of people obviously use Google Chrome, and I feel like probably a little bit of a bamboozle there because you can create different profiles, and so you might have a work profile and a personal profile, and you're probably switching through a couple different windows, and you think you're kind of segregating your data that way. But at the end of the day, you're running the same app. It has the same unique identifier. It's all connected. You haven't separated anything, and so that's one big kind of like red flag. If you're a little bit privacy conscious or even just maybe OCD or organized, you might use two browsers. Maybe you use Safari or Explorer or Edge or whatever for personal stuff, and you might use Chrome for work or vice versa. And you kind of segregate it out that way. But still, a site would know specs of the machine, the IP address, the location, the screen resolution, the processor, every data point about your machine can easily get cross-tracked and cross-referenced. Obviously, these are like multi-billion, sometimes trillion-dollar companies with every interest in the world of being able to profile people. So the smartest people in the world are actually working on this kind of stuff. So it's very hard to outsmart them or try to do anything different. You can try to. And then the third option is maybe leaning into a little bit more on the privacy browser side of things. And so there's a couple good ones out there like a DuckDuckGo or a Brave or shameless plug on the ULA side. There's different versions of this. Arc is a new one that's coming out and up on the up. And so there's other options out there that kind of create these different profiles and will separate the information and use different unique identifiers and kind of do everything that the vendor can to kind of fool these bigger companies into not being able to connect the dots.
Well, one of the questions that came in, I think is interesting and related to this, of course, and that is how incognito is incognito mode.
Not really at all. I mean, to Google's credit, I think they've always had basically the text on the screen that said like incognito, like all it does is doesn't save your search history. So that's all. If you think of it, it's only just search history is the only thing that doesn't get saved. And the only thing that doesn't get saved is it just doesn't get saved locally. It's not that Google doesn't know every site you're going to in an incognito mode. It's just that if the next person gets in your machine and you start typing in a browser or a URL, it's not going to auto-populate based on your history. That's all incognito does. I think people probably fantasized it a little bit more and started believing that it did zero tracking or it was like a completely different way to do things. Unfortunate, but yeah, I would say incognito is not really anything besides just.
About other browsers?
It sounds like it's poorly named, or maybe it's correctly named if you're in the marketing department with its.
I'm sure there's a lot of people that make a lot of money that decided on that name and the wording specifically.
Yeah, exactly. Well, I mean, talking about browsers in general, you know, there are a lot of there are only a few browsers people use, right? I mean, we use Chrome, we use Safari, but there are some other browsers out there, like, you know, DuckDuckGo, and I know you guys have ULA, and so there are some browsers that have at least from a advertising perspective have said they provide more help, and I guess that's true of the search engine world too, right? Because the Chrome to Google search is probably the biggest part of that problem. So I mean, are they good? Does that help? Can I do something to make that work better for me?
Yeah, I mean, I'd say like in the last 5 years, you've probably seen a lot more browser innovation than we had in the past like 10 before that. And so that's a really good thing. The hard part about browsers is one, nobody wants to pay for a browser. You got to expect it to be free now. So to have like a sustainable business model as the browser being your company's only product is pretty difficult. That's kind of why we see like Brave going into like, you know, their privacy-friendly ads or whatever it is, and their like tokens and crypto kind of thing that they started with. DuckDuckGo obviously does ads too, just different levels of tracking. And other vendors like maybe like Arc or something like that no revenue quite yet, but eventually they'll start charging people or introduce ads or something like that. So it's just hard to charge people for that. I mean, I don't think it's crazy that, we'll spend, I don't know, $20 on something dumb on a game on your phone, but you won't spend 99 cents or $1 on a browser you use 8 hours a day. Like, the trade-off isn't there, but it's just kind of where we are, I guess, and how we prioritize spending. So in that case, it's very difficult. Then when the big companies make browsers, maybe you take Edge, maybe you take Chrome, maybe even you take us in that example, that browser is being subsidized by some other part of the business. So for example, Microsoft makes money in 100 different ways. They don't really need Edge to make money. Edge is just a way to feed them, traffic and kind of and market share. Same thing with Google, except in their case, it feeds like the search business, so it helps them a lot there. For us, our angle personally is more, privacy is, I would say, a core part of the browser, but eventually it'll lead to privacy plus, kind of like an enterprise grade browser. So more of a business oriented browser with the right plugins and the right admin controls and the right compliance features and limiting downloads and websites and sectioning off, different pieces of data to make sure they don't get shared. All that kind of like business side of things. No one's really made a business browser that works well yet. There's configurations in Chrome, but it's a very messy thing to do. And so that's kind of our goal. So there's one, to make it sustainable on its own, but two, like privacy being at the core is just kind of a added benefit, which I think everybody's kind of going towards. But it's hard to keep track of what's actually privacy and what's not, because the wording of the apps and the browsers and how they say things is very tricky.
Turning it a little around, what Stephen asks there is quite interesting. So in how far is that an effective policy from, or why are they doing that?
Yeah, so I mean, in his case about the EDU account, not 100% sure. I would imagine it probably has to do with something around the lines of kind of when a university signs one of these usually workplace deals with Google or Microsoft or whatever. There's usually a lot of privacy controls in place around student data, research data, stuff like that. I know there was a big, I want to say maybe like it had to have been at least 5-7 years ago. There's something about like EDU accounts and Google basically reading emails of those EDU accounts and workplace accounts. And then they kind of had to backtrack. And I think it was workplace accounts overall, like all business Gmail accounts were actually getting fed emails too and being scanned for ads. And so then businesses were like, oh yeah, we're not going to be a part of that. And so it's probably some limitation on some licensing there, but I wouldn't doubt that Google would come around and say, look, next year or next time your renewal is up for the university, it's either going to go up 20% or we can keep the same price, and then we'll basically farm your data. You pick. And most of the time, you'll probably pick the latter.
So this basically suggests that the browsers are not actually the challenge, but the combination with search engine business?
Yeah, I would say that. I mean, I would say Edge and Chrome are built for their browser to generate money, basically, right, with the defaults. Apple's in this weird situation where Safari uses Google as the default. Obviously, a big lawsuit going on with that, and we'll see where it kind of comes with. But I read like maybe earlier this month there was an article where Apple was even considering making DuckDuckGo the default browser or default search engine for private browsing. So there is some exploration there. A lot of rumors about Apple would actually come up with their own search engine. But basically, the browser is too good of a resource at farming data to not be used for some targeting thing. It's just kind of like you're leaving a lot of money on the table if you don't do it that way, because there's just so much information you can collect about somebody.
Yeah, that's the gateway.
Yeah, that's the hard part.
So let's be honest. So that's the door that we all use to do anything. Meanwhile, nearly everything.
Well, or it was until we start using our generative AI connection to the search engine rather than going to the search engine, right? I mean, do you think that's going to change things a bit, Tejas?
I mean, I would say I'd be weary. Like I think in the early days of like Bard or ChatGPT, there was concerns where like, if you ask it, I don't know, what are the top 3 flavors of soda? And maybe that's an ad-based answer. Maybe you don't know, and you don't have that trust that it's actually going to be the right answer. Or it says like, some of them are maybe debatable, but like based on, I don't know, like 20 different sites, you can probably find 20 different answers on the best soda, the best car, or like what's the best store to go to, or the nearest one nearby, or whatever it is. You're starting to introduce something that makes you question it. And the companies that you're relying on haven't really earned a lot of trust. They've only kind of broken trust over the course of, the past 10, 15 years. And so it makes you question it even more. And then you don't really know what's true and what's not, or what's like a real answer and what's sponsored. Maybe you'll say sponsored, who knows? And then you have to wonder what's an unsponsored answer. How do I get an unsponsored answer? Maybe you can't. So I think, the generative side is good in the early stages where it's kind of wild west right now, but that's also what the internet was kind of like. But as time goes on, there's no question that it'll get commercialized in a pretty beefy way.
Well, so a little off topic, but I know, the kind of the related topic to this is passwords, and password usage there's a bunch of different things that have been changed. Like you're starting to see more biometric and password managers, and but even with that, you still see most surveys when people are asked about it, they either write them down, which that has to be insane. I can't imagine what that would be like, but I mean, that people do what they do, or they use the browser, right? So I mean, how do we address that problem? Is there something we can do inside of this realm of browser world that we're talking about to help with that problem?
Yeah, my dad actually had a piece of paper in his wallet with like all of the bank account passwords up until like 4 or 5 years ago, and I finally had to get him to get rid of it.
Well, at least it wasn't like posted on his screen, right? I mean,
yeah, that'd be a little bit worse.
It's on the background.
Yeah, exactly.
I think it was last month or so. 23andMe, the DNA website, they had like this breach that happened, and they basically blamed users for their passwords being poor for the reason for the breach. They basically just said that was half the reason. Which seems kind of wild to me. I mean, at the end of the day, I think passwords, from a vendor perspective, it's almost like it's not in their best interest for users to have a complicated password. So if you think of it in like a marketing mind, the more fields you add to a sign-up form, the lower the conversion rate's going to be. The more complicated you require a password to be, the more, lower the conversion is going to be. So if I require like 16 characters and uppercase, lowercase, symbols, the whole nine, how many people are just going to be like, no, right? Or like, forget it, or it's too complicated. And so the trade-off is almost like, how do I increase the conversion while decreasing security, and then offload the onus of, account security on the user rather than the vendor kind of mandating it, right?
Yeah.
There's a lot of, sometimes two-factor authentication will be like optional rather than mandatory. It's like, well, that's great. Most banking systems don't even let you use authenticator apps for two-factor authentication. It still relies on SMS. And we know SMS is not like the safest way for TFAs. No. So like, it's kind of like the most secure systems, banking, should rely on third-party authenticators like Google Authenticator or whatever other apps, Authy or whatever. But they don't. And so the onus is, definitely shifted from the vendor to personal protections. You can no longer expect the company to kind of want to keep their customers' information safe. It's on you to kind of protect yourself. And so that's a pretty difficult thing. I would recommend anyone to always use a password manager of some sort. The hard part about password managers is if you rely on the browser and then you try to log in on something on your phone, you're going to hit a roadblock. If you, that goes for, most people will use Chrome on their computer and maybe Safari on their phone. The passwords are not going to sync up. You're going to be in a problematic thing. So the biggest password managers between Google and Apple, which both recently made some updates about, sharing passwords and kind of creating more of a better password atmosphere. It's also, a lot of it is about vendor lock-in too. If I keep all my passwords in the Apple keychain, then I have to use Apple devices and I'm not going to access them elsewhere. So there's a little bit of a trade-off there. That's kind of where third-party services come in handy. There's more privacy ones like Bitwarden, I think, is a self-hosted, or a cloud one. 1Password's pretty popular. LastPass got bought and then they had a hack or something like that. So that was not a good look for them. But in general, anything you can do to have kind of like a platform agnostic password manager is ideal. You don't want to get locked in, because the pain of setting up passwords, even like I said, when I did it for my parents, you're logging into 40 sites, you're clicking forgot password, you're resetting every single one with a new one, you're saving it. It's not a friendly thing. And so switching is very annoying, and setting it up originally is very annoying. And so that's kind of why they want you to lock into one of those two ecosystems. That's kind of become a pretty big play.
Yeah, but then all those password managers that you just mentioned are, well, we regularly read about them being hacked.
Yeah, that's
LastPass being hacked repeatedly.
Yeah.
So
yeah, it's hard to say safe.
Well, they are becoming the natural target. But then is biometrics the
I'd say
obvious
that's kind
way
of
out?
like, yeah, passkeys have become pretty up and coming now. I think with the Apple introduction and Google too. So that's one way. But also with passkeys, I think there's going to be a little bit of a learning curve for people to understand how they actually works. If you lose your phone or your authentication device, how does the backup or restoration work? It's kind of not an easy process.
Can you
And so,
can tell you
yeah.
but
so and especially for like non-technically inclined people, it's one of those things that sounds very good in the moment, but then when the edge case happens or the worst case happens, how well does it deal with those situations? It's not ideal. So it's a step in the right direction, but I think there's probably some ways we can make the experience a little bit better.
Well, the other thing that I see vendors do and government agencies particularly is the old change your password every 90 days or 120 days, whatever it is. And it seems to me like that's just an excuse to make your password easy to hack.
Yeah,
right?
It gets
Right?
worse over time. 100%. We used to have like this outdated password policy like that. I think it was every like 30 or 60 days you had to change your laptop password. And so it would just go, I would just change the number. Like it would go from the last number before, then it would be 5, and it would be 6, and I just, eventually I'll lose track and then go back to 1 or something like that and reset. And so, yeah, I don't think those I would say that's like an antiquated way of doing password enhancements. I think I know I've read something about it, but I can't quote it. But basically, it was like changing passwords every X amount of days. Like you said, is less secure than just having like a strong, long password. So 16 to 20 characters, uppercase, lowercase, symbols, numbers, the whole 9. That's the strongest way. You don't have to change it. But unique passwords is the most important thing, because once you start reusing passwords, that's kind of where you open yourself up for a lot. Because once one service gets hacked, then they'll try every other service with that same password combo, and that's where you really have problems. So I mean, if there's anything to do, it's definitely unique passwords. Even if you're going off by one, most of the time, I would say like a hacker or someone trying to log into accounts isn't really doing variations of a password. They might, it probably gets a little bit more easier over time, but as long as you have a unique password per site and never replicate, that's probably the number 1 step. The number 2 step is having a complicated password that's never replicated. And then the 3rd step is, hopefully you can organize and remember that information, or using a password manager to keep track of it.
Getting a bit back to browser and browser action, browser security, browser privacy. One of the big culprits is something that was intended to do good: cookies. Well, I love cookies, especially chocolate chips. But what I do not really love is the cookies that are put onto my computer, because they are, at the end, not, well, third-party cookies at least, not used to help me, but to help somebody else. As we all know, they are about to die. Well, they at least are on notice. Does that really help the user? Will that have an impact, a positive impact on retaining a modicum of privacy, or getting back a modicum of privacy?
I really don't think so, to be honest. The idea of third-party cookies is really that, like, I'm visiting, abc.com, and then xyz.com can't drop a cookie on me. And typically it's used for like multiple advertising agencies or whatever. But it is not rocket science to, like, basically, instead of dropping a cookie for the third-party domain, you host it on your own domain, probably charge a premium for it, and now it becomes a first-party cookie. And like, there's no way to know what's actually stored in that cookie, how much information is being captured, what happens with that data post, cookie creation, and then on the server side, where that information is being exchanged to. So it's kind of like it's a step in the right direction, in my opinion, but it's not really going to change anything fundamentally. It'll just, I think, if anything, it helps bigger players who can adopt and come up with creative ways, and it probably hurts smaller players, either that or consolidation. But I don't really see it fundamentally changing the way you're kind of tracked. It's just a couple more hoops that are going to happen, but not much else.
So what you're basically saying is that the Google Tag Manager cookie will no more be hosted by Google, but by abc.com. And
yeah, so they give you some files, you can host it on your own.
Has a contract with Google that this data is directly transferred there.
Yeah, just run some, add some app or script that's running on the server side, and it'll collect all the Google Tag Manager information and push it off, and it'll seem like a first party thing. It's not that hard to do. So people
Oh,
are probably already doing it.
it's just
I don't want
effort
to give them
because you need to
ideas.
have a contract with lots of people.
So
Yeah,
it
exactly.
just gives the business development people more to do. Is that what you're
Yeah.
saying?
Yeah, I think that's really all it is. So I mean, but it'll help. It'll help bigger companies with like bigger domains and stuff like that have a lot of online presence. So in that situation, yeah, it just kind of hurts smaller players who might be legitimately relying on things. But yeah, I don't think it really solves the problem. I think at the end of the day, you have like $1 trillion ad industry. They're going to do everything in their power to track whatever they can to target however they can. So it's kind of like whack-a-mole, really.
But
So-
that sounds quite dystopian, right?
I mean, so I mean, that makes me want to ask, and I think the audience probably really would like to hear this too. So what do we do? How can we protect ourselves?
That's a tough one, I would say. I mean, one is not to give up the good fight. Two, understand. I think trying to group, I guess, privacy and security kind of go hand in hand. But on the security side, we kind of talked about password management and trying to protect yourself, at least from that perspective. On the privacy side, being conscious of what you sign up for in general. I think a lot of times we're still kind of using email as kind of like this unique identifier for folks. I know Apple, I'm pretty sure, I don't know if Google has it or not, but a couple of their services have it, where you can kind of generate this temporary email whenever you sign up for an account, and it'll use that temporary email. And so then if you want to unsubscribe or spam or delete it, it'll just kind of like stop, and then they don't actually know who you really are. Oftentimes I'll tell people, create multiple email accounts, maybe on a more privacy friendly one that's only for finance, one that's only like your bank accounts and credit cards, one that might be for like your house accounts, one that might be for social media. And so you kind of distribute things a little bit more using a privacy protecting browser, preferably some sort of an ad block, locking down security settings and cookie settings, clearing history and cookies after a browser close. These are all things that are small little steps you can make. But I think I kind of go back to the whack-a-mole example where at the end of the day, I guess maybe it circles back to the original thing that Michael said, that exchange of data for a service, you want to make sure that that trade is equal. When you think you're kind of getting ripped off where the service is not as good as the data you're giving it, that's kind of where everyone kind of just feels a little cheated. Just one last quick example, I think like Google Photos had this big thing a couple years ago where they did like you can upload and back up all your iPhone data or like all your pictures, unlimited pictures on Google Photos or whatever. That lasted like 2 years, and then they say, oh, we're gonna trim it down, and you don't get original quality, you get like this optimized quality, so the quality goes down, and then it's only going to be like X number of photos or amount of size. So basically duped everybody into uploading their entire photo library to Google, and then rug pulled it out and basically said, yeah, now we're either going to charge you for it, and you got to pay $2-3 for a Google One or whatever it is, or delete your photo. But they already got the photo. They've already run, their entire ML stack on every single photo out there. And so, yeah, it's like the ultimate, not even a rug pull. That's kind of like, I mean, I guess someone who's been following tech for a long time, you'd probably see these kind of trends and know there's certain companies you never trust in these situations. But I think, the biggest bamboozle I guess everybody got was Gmail, because back then nobody didn't trust Gmail. So we trusted Gmail, and that was the big middle finger to like Hotmail and Yahoo. And then they got us all, and that's 20 years later, we're all literally using Chrome because we basically have Gmail accounts, and that's how we all got stuck. So yeah, it's finding vendors you can trust. I think is a big thing. There's a fewer and fewer bigger vendors out there, and so ones that you can play with, when you can't, how you can kind of mitigate, make sure you stay safe, and yeah, it's kind of, I don't know. I don't want to leave on a depressing note, but there is hope. I think the fact that there is a lot of privacy talk happening and it's kind of becoming more popular, there is hope. But I think also some sort of like regulation around it. I think states have a couple of good ones: Colorado, California, a few others. Chicago or Illinois has a good biometrics one. And if we can get some like federal regulation about it in the U.S., kind of similar to GDPR or other countries, then that'll be a step in the right direction. But until we don't have that, I think companies are going to try to exploit whatever they can.
Talking about, and this is now really a one for a quick one, actually, because we are about end of time. You build your own browser, as you put into your shameless plug. Zoho is one of the trustworthy ones, and Zoho is on the forefront of working with privacy. Why the heck did you then use Chromium as the engine? Because that engine is so Googled that
Yeah.
it's
I would
probably
say
hard to ungoogle.
it's really hard to give you the short answer, but I'll try. So basically, there's like the browser that we all use and understand. It's built on top of like a set of like web protocols and standards, and these like international organizations that set these protocols and standards. You can imagine they're funded and have members from Google, Apple, Microsoft, all the biggest companies in the world who will basically fund that organization and then create the standards. So it's kind of like you can't just make up your own web standard and have things rendered properly. There's like too big of a market out there now. So you kind of have to build on top of one of these systems. And the only real open systems is the Chromium system that they only open up just to kind of make it seem like they're not like the most evil company in the world. But it's actually like more evil than that because they'll bake in so much spyware in the open source version that's so obfuscated that you can't even find it. It takes companies, years, and it takes us like constantly. We're finding every new Chrome update, security patch ends up being some sort of, privacy thing. We have to figure out where they backdoored it or where that information is being sent to. So it's good and bad. They kind of gave the foundation, but a very bloated one. So it takes a lot of time to de-bloat it, which is what, it's what Arc has done. It's what Edge has done. And, these are teams of hundreds, thousands of people that all they do is work on this Chromium open source repo and try to strip out as much Google stuff as they can and then add their own value on top. So it's good and bad, but it's really just, at the end of the day, it was an open source available, most widely used and highly customizable. And I guess sometimes it's the devil is better than the one you don't.
Okay, so that's really, we are out of time. That is probably a topic of its own. Yeah? So
yeah, for sure.
Thanks for being here, Tejas, for us. And I'm glad to say that you survived the hot seat. It actually looks like you didn't really get burned. But
no, that's a good thing.
That's a good stuff. So to the audience, if you think you have what it takes to be in the hot seat, take Tejas as an example, stay cool. And then just let us know. We'd love to hear you. And this is all from In the Hot Seat today. Thanks a lot for being here. Thanks for being with us. Thanks for being a repeat offender. I'm Thomas Liebernight.
And I'm Michael Fawcett. Tune in next time for different faces, different topics, different perspectives as we put someone new in the hot seat.